Hello, gracefully chosen community, and welcome to Foster My Stories, the achievement focused podcast for foster care, adoption, orphan, inclusive of the underserved communities. I'm your host, Shalina Michelle Tate, and on today's cast episode, I would like for you to get to know my featured special guest for September, Kathi Sohn. She has retired from the federal government to carry on her husband's work as a life coach. She provides courses, articles, and seminars for those wanting trauma healing through the body memory process, which we will cover soon. But first, welcome to Foster My Stories, Ms. Kat. Before we get into the body memory process, can you please share with listeners a snippet into your past as it transitioned into working for the federal government?
Yes, hi. Well, thank you, Shalina, for having me here. This is great.
Welcome.
So I started out my first career, my past life, I like to say, started with 4 years in the U.S. Army. It was really a chance for me to kind of get my act together because I had been in college. I had changed my major a couple of times. And my dad, who was a contractor with the Navy, said, maybe the military is something that you need. It'll be sort of a fresh start. And it was really that for me. I had low self-esteem when I went in, but when I came out, I had earned lots of awards. I was mostly done with an undergraduate degree. And I went right into the Department of Defense. It was a very easy transition because of the work I'd been doing in the Army. And so I just stayed with that work. It was probably instilled in me from my dad. He worked for General Dynamics, and he said if you stick with one, you don't just move all around. You stick with one, and then you end up with a good retirement.
Yeah.
So that's really the way to go. And I actually found it easy to do that because I had the opportunity to take so many varied assignments during those 36 years, including the Army. So 32 years actually as a civilian. My work took me to 3 different war zones. I spent 6 months in Afghanistan, and I was in Iraq about 3 times. And I was also in Sarajevo not long after the war ended. So just really fun. I love being in the middle of the action. And the only thing about the work that I didn't like is it was sort of shrouded in that, secrecy, right? Because it's necessary for national security. And so it's like, you can't talk to the media, never, ever talk to the media. And now that I'm doing this work, I can, embrace the media. I like getting out there and sharing. And it's really fun because this is a new new thing for me, a new life. So unfortunately, the beginning of my doing this work really full time, it began with the passing of my beloved husband, David Sohn, almost 3 years ago. Now, in October, it'll be 3 years. I was on my last assignment in Hawaii, and he went downhill rather quickly. It was just before the pandemic started, and I was facing children in schools that were closing, and I was still working a full-time job in a very expensive place to live, and needing to have childcare. It was going to have to be all day long. And so I decided it's time to retire. I was eligible. And as soon as the school year was over, we came back to the mainland. And we ended up in Alabama, which is actually where David was living when we first met back in 1994. But no accident. I mean, I chose to live here because we had mutual friends, and they said this is going to be a great place to raise kids. I have a son on the autism spectrum, and they said it's really good, especially working with children with special needs. And it really has been. I'm happy to be here. So when I sort of got settled in and looked around and said, what am I going to do? It didn't take long for me to say, well, why don't I continue this amazing work that David had started and had done for 30 years, but it was not scaled, not really widely available. like I believe it needs to be. And so that's really the mission that I've taken on, is teaching what the work is about and getting it out there.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Kathy. Very dynamic points that you made. First of all, your father, his words of wisdom sounded phenomenal. I wish I could have heard that when I was younger, but that's awesome just to hear that work ethic from an early age, and then it helped you transition as you grew in life. Also, just your background in the federal government, and of course, like you said, I understand about how everything is, private and secret as far as the confidentiality. But I'm glad to hear now you're able to carry on your husband's legacy through what you do, and also the impact you're going to make. And also, as far as your son and just, special needs, it's like you've always been prepared to be equipped for that. Yeah. So I'm excited for, just your journey, and also getting into the dynamics of what you do as it relates to the body memory process. Can you share with listeners, define what that is? What is the body memory process?
Yeah, certainly. So I'd like to begin with talking just for a couple of minutes about my beloved husband, David Sohn. So David was 14 years old when he was pronounced dead from double staph pneumonia, and then he came back. He had no pulse, no respirations for a pretty significant period of time. And then his dad noticed something on the machine, and that's supposed to do that. And he was back. And he says that he knew that he had, it was amazing. He had one of those near-death experiences that you hear about. And he said, I realized I have something important to do here. And as he grew, I think it came clear to him what that was going to be. And he didn't know specifically, but he knew it had something to do with wellness. So the doctors told him after he came back that he had a lot of damage in his lungs because of the disease, and that he would never really be truly well. He would never be able to be really active. And he didn't like that. And so he made up his mind that no, he was going to be, all of those things. And he says that he started on this quest for, what is wellness. And when he was, when he got out of college, it was right about the time when, the human potential movement was going on. There was a lot of awakening about the power of our minds, of thoughts and what we believe. And he studied everything he could. He took all kinds of trainings, and he pulled together the body memory process with what I like to say the three really major underpinnings. One, of course, is the power of belief. There's science even backs that up now. You can pick up any Scientific American and it's talking about that. It wasn't always that way. Articles that have come out in Newsweek and Time Magazine, so really mainstream, talking about, yes, it's absolutely true. They know about the power of prayer, and all of that is really, I think, becoming much more widely accepted. But back then, it was something that really formed an underpinning of this work. There's also the mind-body connection, which was actually proven for the first time by a scientist named Dr. Candace Pert, when she discovered that there are receptors all over the body for neuropeptides. And there's a lot of science I won't get into, but basically when there is trauma, it actually, what she says, lays down deep roots in the body. So it's not just about something going on in the mind. It's absolutely a physical phenomenon as well. And this was really the first time then they were able to say, that the mind and the body are absolutely connected and affect each other. And then the third thing is the fact that babies and young children are very conscious. Now they're not logical, but they're conscious, and they are creating their belief system. So if anyone has heard Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, he is a cellular biologist and professor. He says, children are in a theta brainwave state from the womb until about 7 years old. And while they are in this state, they are forming their core beliefs. He likens it to you have a new computer. It has its operating system, but it doesn't have its programs. Children need to have those programs so that when they're about 8 years old and they go into a more of a more of a conscious state, they start becoming increasingly logical, that they're able to function because they've made these observations. Now, here's the catch, though, is that these observations may not be all positive, and the beliefs that are formed might be very destructive, and especially to one's self-identity.
Yeah.
And so that's really kind of that's the crux of the whole thing. That's what the body memory process is about, is helping people to discover what were those decisions they made very early in life. And it's called the body memory process because these memories are accessed really through the body. It's about the body, what the messages the body has for us, really kind of talking to us about what's going on. And also, what's going on in your life that's not working well is also a big key to the beliefs that you have that are you may not want. They may have served you when you were a child, because when children create these beliefs, remember, they're learning about the world and they're not logical, so they can take a negative experience and make a conclusion. They make a leap, if you will, that's not logical. But it's to them, it is. It's about, okay, this is the way I need to be loved. This is what I need to do, make sure that I do or that I don't do in order to get loved and get my needs met. So the body memory process itself is a sort of a two-pronged thing for the self-discovery on the one part, what were those decisions? And then there is the healing part, which is releasing those vows. It's about emptying the physical, the spiritual, and the mental cup, as David would put it, so that you actually change what's in your cells. And there's a lot of science behind that as well, that anyone can read about. Dr. Pert's work, and she went on to write several books about. One is called Molecules of Emotion, and she wrote several books about that phenomenon. One thing I want to put in here, before I forget, because it just floated through my mind, is that when children are making these beliefs, it's not all based upon traumatic experiences, even though a lot of times it is. Either it's trauma from actual abuse or neglect. Children who are in the foster community are so especially prone to making those beliefs about themselves in the environment, that very turbulent environment that they're in. But these beliefs can also be formed on what you might think are actually positive experiences. So I'll give you an example of, I'm 3 years old. I can't get my dad's attention very often, but I have it at this moment. We're having a great time. Maybe I'm sitting on his knee and he says, you'll always be my little girl. And I'm like, somewhere in me, it's like, I got it. And I make this logical leap between, I'm having this great time, I'm connecting with my dad, and so I always need to be his little girl in order for that to happen. Well, it's okay to always be daddy's little girl, and maybe when you go home and you're a woman and you visit him and you kind of giggle, or you feel like you almost feel like you're back. I know I always felt that way when I would go back home. I kind of feel like I was a little girl again. But it doesn't work when you're in the presence of a powerful male in your life as an adult who activates this vow. You might have a boss and again, it's not conscious. A lot of this is all happening on a subconscious level, kind of activates that vow. And now I can't really function, as a mature woman, because this is, that's just one example. I mean, there's so many vows that can activate and cause a lot of problems for people in a lot of different environments. But that's one example. And it's one that's made actually during a very fun, pleasant time, but it's about what the child decided and not about necessarily, blaming mom or dad or some adult who caused the problem. It's not about that. It's about, what the child decides, as a natural sort of function of the way it's set up for us to create our core belief system during that time period.
Yeah, and thank you so much for expounding on your wisdom there, as far as just kind of highlighting to us that it's not always relative to trauma. I was going to ask, about cases where, because I've heard it said a few times, like that people have suppressed stuff to the point, when they've kind of dealt with trauma, there may have been a point where stuff got suppressed, where to the point where they don't remember things happening. How can they get to back to a healthier place of remembering the vows or knowing that they had vows at once upon a time? It's kind of like the example you made of, um, I was daddy's little girl, and that put me back in a safe place. But it's different now because I'm a woman, and that's, the dynamic's gonna be different because now this person's my boss and a authority figure. So the dynamics is different there. How can one who, I know it's kind of going a little bit off the questions I want to ask, but how can one come to, I don't know,
Awareness.
Yeah, awareness.
I understand the question. It's not, unfortunately, a lot of times one doesn't come unless they're exposed to it. Like maybe they, watch a podcast and they're like, oh, and then they maybe go into, gee, I wonder if there's something going on for me.
Okay.
If someone isn't exposed to it, it's really difficult to get there, to that realization. And sometimes it's because I'm tired of this. I'm tired of being sick and tired. Right? I think a lot of people get to that point. Like,
yeah.
There's something going on. They start to notice a pattern, and sometimes they don't think they can get out of it. I mean, they may be so oblivious to the fact that they are truly the creators of their own reality, that they may tend to blame everything outside of themselves for what's going on, and then they might never get there. That's why it's so important for everyone to just remember to turn inward, and whether it's the biomemory process or meditation, and there's so many wonderful opportunities out there now, more and more therapies and opportunities for people to have that self-exploration, that it's good. Anything that someone does that takes a step in the direction of looking inward for answers, that's when they start to wake up to, gee, there might be something going on. Now, people used to tell David that his work was like a laser beam as opposed to traditional psychotherapy, which is like a flashlight. So there's nothing wrong with going to see, for psychotherapy, or going for any of these, any method for, talking it out and, that discovery that way, that's all good. It's just people a lot of times want to get quicker to the solution. And this work, it really helps you to get immediately to the underlying cause. And there is, there's ways to get to, what those vows are. And that's really the key.
Yes, thank you for sharing that as well. And you're right there. There's different ways people deal with just life and their past and experience. And for me, like just talking to you here could be therapeutic for me, but somebody else may listen in and say, you know what, I want to find out more about that body memory process, because maybe they're wanting to explore and go deeper as far as, how do I relate? Prime example for me, I kind of see what you're saying about sometimes stuff is not introduced. This was years ago. I was watching an episode of Maury with a foster parent, and I was fine until the guest talked about a certain situation she went through, and it just triggered a moment back from my past. Just came out the blue. I was fine, and it just overtook me. So I can understand that. What you were saying, that sometimes stuff is not an awareness until it's like an introduction or a reintroduction to something. You mentioned the how definitely memories and just those vows can really affect the foster care. I wanted to ask you what relative connections helped you attribute your expertise to the foster, adoption, and or orphan communities as it relates to the process.
Sure. So I am adopted. That's one of the things that really makes me know that this is so important to children with those types of beginnings, because I had quite a few difficulties growing up, and it wasn't because of the adoption necessarily, but because of the trauma that I experienced in the womb and at birth, if you want to call it a birth. So yeah, I had a very violent beginning to life where my birth mother tried to essentially do a home abortion when she was in 6 months with me. So I essentially came into the world at just about, I think my adoptive mom said it was around the end of the 6th month.
Okay.
So I ended up in an incubator for quite a while. I was very tiny. I was, I think she said I was about 1 pound, 14 ounces when I was born. So I have a kind of and this might be a story for another time, but I didn't even realize I was adopted until I was in my 30s. And, it really wasn't my adoptive parents' fault.
Yeah.
They tried to tell us when we were actually, I have 2 brothers that are also adopted. And they tried to tell us when we were about 7. I think that's when they just said, like we talked about before, children, when they hit 7, they're supposed to be able to understand some abstract things. And she gave each of us a book called The Chosen Baby, which is about, it's a beautiful book. I can still see, I'm a very visual, I have a photographic memory, and I can actually remember all the pages of the book, the pictures in it and everything. I read it so many times, but I must have never gotten it was about me, because when I was in my teens, I said something that made my mom realize that I didn't get it, that I was adopted. And then she kind of struggled with when was the right time. And anyway, I found out when I was in my 30s, and it started to make a lot of things make sense. And I always knew, like she told me before, that I was premature, but not all the other details. And what I started to realize was that all through, as I was growing up, I was extremely nervous getting in front of a group, talking in front of, and I could, if I had a little private conversation, I was okay. But if I had to stand in front of the class, I would get beet red. I would just almost pass out. I was so nervous. And this continued into my adulthood. Every time I needed to, a lot of people get nervous about public speaking. I mean, that's a really known thing. But even if I needed, it was everybody go around the room and introduce yourself. I would get that adrenaline rush, like, oh my God, I'm going to have to say my name in front of everybody. And that was one of you asked about, how do you realize that there's something going on? I was like, there's got to be some reason for this. And after I met my husband, I learned about this work. I did the work, and you're not going to believe the vow I had. It's absolutely amazing. But I had formed a vow when I was in an incubator, because, well, first of all, I was in an incubator, probably didn't get held and touched really as much as I would have been really healthy, but I got peered at a lot by the medical staff. And, this was back in, 1961, I guess, time. So I'm 60 years old now. So that was a long, back then, they didn't have the resources that they do now. And I think they probably, either thought and maybe even said to each other, I don't think this one's going to make it, or something like that. And I picked up on that. Again, and it's not like babies can understand language. It's an energetic thing. It's something they can talk about scientifically, but it's not something that's language. And I had the vow, they watch me to see when I'm going to die.
Oh no.
That was the decision I made. And so you can see how then these years later, I'm standing in front of a group and I'm being watched. I'm the center of attention. And I'm pretty, it's a life and death experience for me.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
and you can even kind of take it as a little bit of a metaphor for an expectation from the audience that I'm going to die, meaning I'm going to screw up.
oh, wow.
And so I didn't realize, again, this is all subconscious, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize that I automatically felt that I was being judged every time I opened my mouth.
Okay. See that, thank you for just expounding on that. That makes so much more sense as far as us individually, how and I can now thinking, and I imagine that the listeners, when they can stop and reflect, that there's been times where they felt like something isn't right. Why do I keep going through this same type of cycle? And the cycle could come in many forms, which brings me to um, just my next question, which I will get to right here. Yeah, how does the childhood vow counter thinking as it relates to trauma, life, or finances? I know you kind of your website kind of breaks stuff down as far as different phases, but how can this process really help progress the individual as far as those vows they've made as far as their life?
Sure. So before I go into that, I want to add one more thing about your last question that was,
Mm,
I think, very important for everyone to hear. And so foster parents, anybody who has children in their care who have very turbulent,
yeah,
beginnings and continuings, everything is very much in flux around them all the time. Those children are especially vulnerable to these vows that are going to be really destructive to their very identity.
yeah.
They are vows such as "It's all my fault," uh,
Hmm.
nobody wants me. Again, I have a brother, my adopted brother, who he was 3 before he got adopted, and he had a cycle. Unfortunately, nobody did this work with him, and he ended up being kicked out of every school that was local. Um, they when he grew up and he tried, he went in the army. That didn't work. He got a discharge because of his behavior. He had a marriage that didn't work. It lasted about 6 months. Had a baby out of wedlock that he could never visit.
Yeah.
And he spent his whole life at odd jobs, traveling around. He was in and out of jail because he fell into the wrong company. I mean, it goes on and on about this pattern that
Yeah.
was created in his life, because I'm sure that he must have had, one of those vows about he had been through, I think, several foster homes by the time he was 3. And he must have had shut down, he must have shut down his heart. My mom used to cry about the fact that she could never really hug him. Even he only reciprocated a hug once when he was very ill. So, I grew up with a brother like that, and I thought, if there's anything that I could do to help those children. Now, when I learned about this work after meeting my husband, and I learned about the work as being done with adults, I learned it very deeply being done with adults. But again, from my own experience, my own vows and I have others too that we don't have time to talk about, but based upon my own beginnings, what I saw happen with my brother, I started thinking that maybe it's time to consider working with children with this work,
Yeah.
with children who are especially traumatized, because they are so much at risk.
Yeah.
And I had, I for the first time, I put together a seminar that was presented at foster care conferences to encourage foster parents and caregivers to do this work with themselves. Because once you clear your own vows, and you've done this work on yourself, you're automatically less likely. You're more aware of your language, more aware of your thoughts. You're less likely to actually contribute to the problem by reinforcing a child's vows who's in your care. Through your own baggage, you might say something that might actually trigger them, reinforce their vows, create new ones. But to actually truly be a healing presence in their lives based upon your own personal healing, and then move, and whatever you can. I know that you can't necessarily work with them the same way you would work with an adult,
Yeah.
but getting them to just talk about things, talk about their beliefs, to use some of the processes that we have available to help them along and get them to some forgiveness when they're ready. And just that self-awareness can go a long way. So to answer your next question, these vows, we have about 900 some, almost 1,000 that were discovered. Yes. The past 30 years of working with clients. And David mapped those vows to where they show up as pain, tension, and sometimes disease in the body. It's absolutely, fascinating. And I have, when we published his book, Escaping the Labyrinth, we had them as an annex, an appendix in the back. And I turned it into a hyperlinked sort of a PDF that I want to eventually turn into an app, because I think that would be very valuable. But this is available for people to actually be able to see, kind of like, this is what's going on for me, and this is the set of vows that are associated with this area, how it shows up, and to be able to kind of zero in on it. And those vows, if you were to look through them, you would see that they involve all of those kind of self-help areas of finances, relationships, health, and because when we're in that age group where we're creating our core beliefs, we're surrounded by discussions about all of those areas. For example, a lot of parents kind of pass along, money is the root of all evil. They have this that's been passed to them. And you might grow up thinking that money's bad or scarce. You really have a scarcity conversation about it because you ask for something and you're always told we can't afford it, and not, well, holidays are coming up. Let's put that on a list, and just wording it in a way that isn't about money is scarce.
Yes.
And we can't really blame parents. It's just it's difficult to actually be conscious of what you think and what you say at every given moment, especially in when you're parenting and things tend to be moving quickly, and then you kind of tend to go on automatic, right? And that's when those vows are likely actually show up in our language, and we pass them along and we don't even realize it. So when people do the work, they're able to kind of look across all of those areas. I have a almost hour-long video in my materials to walk people through all those areas. So when they're doing the work and they have say they have some consistent, low back pain, and that means something, but they're not just working on that. They're taking a 360-degree look at their life and how they can heal all of those areas. Relationships is a big one too, because our relationships with mom and dad are the first ones, that we have. And so that's how we, we set up these patterns and beliefs about how to interact with someone in relationship. And, it's either I have to yell to get my way or be passive aggressive, or, any of those things can be unhealthy ways of being in a relationship passed along.
Yes, thank you. You made several dynamic points, and thank you for just, expounding on the questions as it relates to just understanding that more. Just listening to you is reminding me of how, how we touched on foster care, and it's so true because, like, I was on the foster care end of the spectrum, and you're right. A lot of times those vows and those things definitely are heightened in those areas. Foster care, adoption, or if you're going through an orphanage, it's like those things have already kind of been put in your psyche, I guess you want to say, at earlier on. I like how you was relating, because really an example would be the root of rejection. That's very common for, of course, anybody who's going through foster care. I'm not sure if those feelings came for you through adoption, but just to hear that you didn't really know that until later in life. Am I saying this right? It sounded like you had a dynamic parents that, because it sounded, you said earlier about your dad and just, just being mindful of just consistency and longevity. How was your experience with your adoptive parents? How was that?
Well, two of the most loving people on the planet, really. In fact, my mom was a nurse, and she wanted to. They couldn't have children, and she actually sought out the children who had some of the most traumatic beginnings, which is one of the reasons that they got me. So they were very, very loving. Now they had their own baggage. They had their own issues that would come up. In fact, it's I'll tell you real quickly one story because it demonstrates the value of this body map that I was talking about. My mom was very, again, very loving, and still very kind of overprotective. And I think especially of me, I was the only girl and I was the youngest. I was her baby. And she really inserted herself in my life well into my adulthood. And, I just didn't, it bothered me, and I didn't know, as what they actually called kind of enmeshed. Our relationship was a little too enmeshed, because I just really, I think because she was she rescued me. I didn't want to do anything to upset her, and so we kind of had that going on. But what I had noticed was I had a real knot in my back, on the left side in the scapula area. And when David set up this body map I was talking about, and this is not, I mean, this is something that's known from like Chinese medicine, and is that the right side of the body tends to be like masculine issues, left side feminine. And I think David added this again from working with clients for so many years, and he started noticing all of these patterns, is that issues that tend to deal with how I relate to the world show up in the front of the body, and the back of the body tends to be how the world is relating to me. And by the world, I mean like significant people in our lives. And then there's the energy system of the body, the chakras. I think a lot of people are becoming aware of the body as an energy system, and that there's 7 chakras in the body. And there's getting up to the area where I had the issue. It was right between the heart chakra and the throat chakra. So heart is about love, throat is about communication. I mean, it's pretty intuitive. And it's the back of the body, left side. And the body map decodes that as it was about how a powerful woman in my life was expressing love to me.
Oh, wow.
So that's how Mom was choosing to love me, is just really kind of being very much inserting herself in my life, trying to make sure that I didn't get hurt. Always made the right decisions according to like what she thought they should be. And so when I did the work, I discovered it. I did the work on it. I didn't have that problem anymore. It's really amazing.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely. And just to piggyback off of what you're saying, it's so true. A lot of people don't realize, I'm learning this now as time passes, but a lot of people don't realize that when you're out and about and you see people that they have hunches in their backs, or they have some kind of medical thing going on, they don't realize it's connected. That's all connected. It's not just, oh, you have a medical issue, or it's a lot of it is connected to, like you said, those vows, and just other people don't understand anger, bitterness, unforgiveness that adds to those issues as well. So just hearing how you was able, that was a great point as far as being able to realize, oh, this represents your mom's love, and then you were able to like really understand that, and then it helped you really move forward as far as being able to be freer. And that's so vital, like you were saying earlier, just finding ways to really address. I think that's key when we get to a place of just being tired, like you said earlier, and really wanting to address, what, I'm going through this cycle. I keep going through these cycles, whether it be through relationships, family, finances, and I'm wanting to make a change. And listeners, the bodymemoryprocess.com, where you can find a lot of Ms. Kat's works, her books, the books that's on there, and you're working on a book right now. Can you share with listeners more about that book you're working on?
Sure. So it is work in progress. I have a working title right now. You made it up. Now stop believing it.
Oh, nice.
So part one is going to be about how you made it up, and part two is going to be how to stop believing it. It's going to be about the work, and then sort of a part three that talks about the difference we can make in the world once we've healed ourselves. And I'm trying to make it really fun and interesting. For it's a topic that can get a little bit dry, because especially when you're talking about the how you made it up part.
Mm-hmm.
And I am writing it through client stories.
Okay.
David had collected a lot of information. Of course, they're anonymous. So there's it's about Jenny, which is a made up name about this one client, and how vows showed up in her life. What was going on then, and it's a story. It's told in about Jenny, a little story about her and what things were going on for her, and then she's in dialogue with me, and we talk about, in each chapter it's a new concept about like how how the body is always listening to us and always talking to us, and about how children create these beliefs. So it's really fun. It's fun to write, and I hope it's going to be very valuable, when it's finished. But yes, on my website, there is a free ebook right now, free ebook download it's about 34 pages with more information. And there's also a course, Discover Your Childhood Vows, Change Your Life. And that's all. There's links all on the website, and you have an option to just have the course, or you could have some coaching with me. There's also a 20-minute free coaching session with me. We can just talk, and we can see whether or not this is something that would be good for you to do.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. It sounds dynamic also, Ms. Kat, especially just by the work you're doing and just wanting people really to heal. And I think I may be saying this for future purposes, but I imagine you're doing this now as well. We briefly spoke, but you were saying, can you tell listeners how, I guess, am I saying this right? You kind of started having people from the foster care adoption communities coming to you, asking you questions, and that kind of really escalated okay, I need to find a way to help the youth or provide education or provide. Are you partnering with like the social services to help with trainings and stuff?
I'm gradually getting into that. I have a group in North Carolina that has me scheduled for a webinar in October. And I've sent them a number of the original book, Escaping the Labyrinth, that they can distribute to their community. Yes, again, I thought through my own journey with my adoption, what happened with my brother, that this would be a step. I always, when I was first considering, not considering, I knew I wanted to do this work and get it out in the world.
Yeah.
There's a piece of it I'd like to get out to people. I really want to reach people in need, but with it, maybe abused women, even who are trying to build their life anew. But that if you can go through all the steps of escaping from a situation that's dangerous, but if you don't do the work, the vow could still be in place, and you could create it all again. And that happens. Unfortunately, we see people who might divorce an alcoholic, and then they end up married to someone who has a different type of addiction, because that vow being in place. And so I think that this could be very valuable to people in need. Everybody, it's widely discussed now, especially after the pandemic, about trauma caused for secondary and tertiary, trauma. And I think that what's happening is people's vows are especially being activated right now, because of what's happened in the world. Because we all felt it. It's an amazing, how many times do we have something that is a worldwide phenomenon that affects every single person on the planet in some way? It's just amazing. And I think that this is actually, an opportunity, a really great opportunity for people to heal.
Yeah.
And so, yes, as anybody who's listening to this has any ideas for how I can reach a certain community with this work, and it's not necessarily about charging every single person for this. I want to reach communities and actually give them this work. And I'm asking if there's a community really in need, I'm saying, here are the materials, do the work, and just give me feedback, because it's very valuable to me. I like to hear the stories of how this has helped people. I want the vows so I can continue to add to the my collection of vows. And so that is what's valuable to me, and then ultimately knowing that people are being healed. So, there's way you can see on the website how to contact me. info@bodymemoryprocess.com. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'm also interested in, my dream is to have a cadre, if you will, of coaches, people who know the work, have done it. And my requirement is they do this work on themselves. And then they are able to go out into the world and maybe engage with the community that they're involved in, and to help coach them. They could, charge a fee if they want. I mean, that would be up to them. But for them to be able to, because I can't do this all myself. And, right now I'm offering coaching, but I might not be able to, if I get too busy in the future, I might not be able to do the coaching part. And I really want this to be available as widely as possible. And the coaching part can be important, because as you're going through, there's 90 days of homework. As you're going through that, people sometimes need someone to help keep them on track.
Yes.
And that they don't give up.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I do have a question for listeners who may ask, you know what, I would love to know more information. Of course, you mentioned the website, and I know you were mentioning the chakras. I know a lot of times when you hear chakras, you think yoga, you think that aspect of it. What would you say to those who are like, I'm not sure about going in it that way, but if I'm like a believer in Christ, how can I pursue the healing of this, and then also be able to help others?
Are you saying if I'm of a belief that's not about the energy, the body as an energy system?
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to like reach out to you and say, hey, you know what, I would love to look into more of your really one for myself, because you were mentioning that the coaches would have to, try it on themselves first and heal. They need their own really journey, and then they can then go and help others. What would you say to the people who are wanting more of the end of, okay, well, how do you, if I view stuff this way, how can I be of assistance as a coach? How can I get the self-healing, and then also help others? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I think this is, it's a very gentle process, and whether or not you, really understand about, the body as an energy system, and your belief system has, you say, well, this is, it's actually good. Whatever belief system that you have, it's really about, connecting, because ultimately we talk about, our body giving us this information. But the body is just I think just one way that God chooses to, to communicate with us. It's the body is, Candace Pert used to say, the body is your subconscious mind. So I think it's really, I think it's kind of it's universal. And when the work is presented in the course, there's not really an emphasis that you have to believe that the vows are even created that early in life, because they're usually a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they get reinforced over time. So if you say, well, it must have been something I decided when I was in childhood, that's okay. It doesn't really matter. you know, the work has been proven time and again to be valuable.
Yeah.
And, you know, if someone is willing to say, okay, you know, let's see if this works for me, you know, that's great. And the other thing I want to mention here too is there's a lot of good stuff out there if people want to work with just the energy side of trauma. You know, the emotion code came out. There's a book about that, and it's actually being done. It's created by a chiropractor because trauma can create, you know, there's about those energy blockages.
Okay.
And sometimes people can't really, maybe they may not be ready to access the actual decision they made. If they could just take a step to help, you know, to work with that, the blocked energy.
Okay.
There's work with essential oils. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Very, it works. It's very valuable. Now, like David used to say, really to create real permanent change, it's important to get to that underlying belief.
Yeah.
Because that's once it's still in there, it's still creating, you know, it's still in cell memory. And that's what we want to, that's what's going to be the most valuable thing.
Thank you so much for expounding on that. And before we go, Ms. Kat, you've already given so much wisdom and just golden nuggets. But essentially, before we go, what advice would you like to give listeners who have, whether they've dealt with trauma or not, who may have questions like about, okay, so what's my vows? And, you know, what questions would you like to really share with them to encourage them, or anybody who's wanting to consult with you or wanting to potentially be a coach for the program? What words of wisdom would you like to leave with them?
Well, I always like to say, you know, turn within. So if that means, you know, prayer, you know, getting quiet and, you know, just turning within, whether it's meditation, and really be honest with yourself. It'll just take a review of your life. What's going on now? You know, Dr. Lipton, I talked about Bruce Lipton, who says, you know, children are in that state of sort of hypnosis. You know, the way that he approaches it is he says, well, you need to kind of get back into that state of hypnosis to be able to sort of change your programming. So, you know, it's really about, you know, turning inward, looking at what's in your life that's not working.
Yeah.
You know, what's going on with your body? You know, do you have something that's a chronic issue? Don't accept it. I think that's the real big key. And a lot of us have thought that we're sort of victims of this, you know, it's chance, you know, you know, and they find it hard because they know that there's a loving God out there. Like, how could this actually happen to me when there's a loving God? And well, it's because, you know, we're living in this world that we are, and, you know, it's kind of set up the way it is because we have to function in this human form. And so we have to be programmed until we're 7.
Yeah.
But I think that this loving God has given people like my husband, who had that near-death experience, this work to heal. I think it's time for people to heal. And, you know, just if you take that inventory and you really think about this, I think a lot of people might be willing to take that step to at least maybe look at the ebook and, you know, and may not want to commit right away, but, you know, you can join my mailing list. I put out, you know, information, and maybe as you keep being exposed, because it doesn't sometimes happen right away. Like, well, you know, I'm not so sure, and that's okay. Give yourself permission to be okay with that, but don't stop exploring. You know, remember, it's about turning inward and get more information and keep your mind open, because there's so much healing available. It's astounding.
Yes, and thank you for expounding on that. And listeners, definitely I would advise you to please come check out the website, bodymemoryprocess.com, the ebook that Ms. Kat is talking about, your childhood vows and now, guide to the revolutionary body memory process for total wellness. And then there's also Escaping the Labyrinth that she spoke about earlier, that you can just come and check out feel free to explore the website. There's a lot of dynamic resources on there for you. There's some sessions and courses, and definitely you can reach out to her as well to network and to really see how you can progress from your past, what you may be going through now, and what you would like to progress with concerning your future. Miss Kat, I really appreciate you just taking time out of your day to be here on Foster My Story. Your time is so valuable, so I really appreciate you and just sharing how you came to just really take over your husband's work. And I just know you have just the heart to just want to help so many people. So yes, also listeners, please reach out to her as well if you want Ms. Kat to network with you as far as your community. Maybe your community needs just to consider these courses and the ebooks to kind of help with healing there, or to just progress the community as a whole. So I'm really excited for just really what you have coming up. Also dynamic that you have that 2-part book coming up that people can be on the lookout for. Do you are they in pre-order for you right now, or will you have that posted on the website?
Yeah, no, that'll be coming toward the end of the year.
Nice. Okay. Well, yes, thank you so much for that. And well, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. And also, yes, thank you. And also, listeners, if your community service job or upbringing connects you as well to the foster, adoption, orphan, or underserved community, like Ms. Kat, I would love to have you on the podcast. You can reach out in a message here or on the Facebook page, Shalene Michelle Tate, or the Foster My Stories Facebook page. And stay tuned. The website is coming up for Foster My Story, where you can catch a lot of content that Ms. Kat is talking about. You can get connected to her there as well. I'm super excited. Stay tuned for that launch. And then also you can check out this content when it's posted on other platforms. Also catch the Foster My Stories podcast on Red Circle, Spotify, Amazon's Audible and Music, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, and then the Foster My Stories Facebook page. So today we basically talked to Ms. Kat, who she has a dynamic past dealing with the federal government, but she's really taken words of wisdom from her father as a youth and just carried that through her life to be the leader that she currently is. Kudos to her for just carrying on her husband's legacy and really wanting to make a heart and change for different communities. Ms. Kat, I'm hoping to, and my wheels were turning when you said you wanted to really also talk to women who've been broken. I think possibly connecting with, I would love to connect you with, we have some alum from the Advanced Foster Care Topics virtual retreat. Ms. Kat was one of the speakers who spoke. Her content is that on your website as well? Your video. Where can people find?
I don't think that's on the website right now, but that would probably be a good idea to put that on there. Yes.
Yeah. She also did a video. A PowerPoint presentation just breaking down that body memory process and just more insight to what that is and just how listeners can gain more knowledge and use it as a resource to help them move forward. Yes. And then really just listeners, feel free to connect with her as a whole and adopt those nuggets that she gave to us today. Also, please remember to tell someone, as always, being fostered, adopted, orphaned, or underserved simply means, like I like to call, you gracefully chosen. Today, Ms. Kat just gave us some nuggets, helped us understood that the vows that we make as in the womb or as a youth are not always tied to trauma, but can also give us an awareness of things that we have repeated cycles in our lives concerning our well-being, concerning our finances, concerning family, and also our thought processes. And so today the goal was to just kind of help us have a renewed look at that we can be rewired and renewed as far as how we think, how we view life, and how we can progress. Ms. Kat, thank you so much for just being here, and Remember, listeners, to foster this story. Take care.